Okay, this is Brian Horner, Curator of Collections at the Estes Park Museum. At the Estes Park Museum on May 13th, 2015, interviewing Kate Rusch about the 2013 flood. Can you please tell us your name and your job title?
Yes, I'm Kate Rusch, and I am the Public Information Officer for the town of Estes Park.
When did you first realize that something was happening in the September of 2013?
It might surprise you to know that the night before the flood, I went to bed not really thinking too much of the rain, other than it had been a while since my husband and I remembered seeing any kind of rain like that. So it was a little bit of a surprise to get a phone call around 2 a.m. from our police department, from our emergency manager, Eric Rose, about some flooding that was going on in Fish Creek, in the Fish Creek corridor. And it was about 3:15 when I was getting to work, putting out information about evacuations of a few homes in that area. It was funny because at that point I thought, well, I should be able to go back to sleep here pretty shortly and we'll see what happens. But about the first time we put out that notification through our email list and on social media about what was going on for some of those residents in Fish Creek, we got an update from the Colorado Department of Transportation explaining that several of our regional highways had been closed for flooding. Not a lot of damage yet, but it was at that point, about 4 a.m. in the morning, when I realized this was not going to be an ordinary event. That was September 12th.
Okay. Once you kind of realized that this was going to be a big deal and that sort of mentality, I guess, kind of took over, what then became your responsibilities?
My responsibility is in an emergency, just like my responsibilities any other time. It's really to get people the information that they need at the right time so that they can make decisions to help themselves, make the best decisions for themselves. And so in an emergency situation like we were experiencing, my role is first life safety, property safety, making sure that people know what they need to do to stay safe, what resources they might need to help themselves, connecting them. And so my role from the get-go with this event was to get people all the information that they needed, to connect agencies together. As a public information officer, I communicate with my counterparts in other organizations. So we quickly get together in an event like that and start communicating about how our agency is responding, what information we need the public to know. And we actually put together what's called a joint information system. And that the purpose of that is to make sure that we have consistent information going out to people. They're not hearing one thing from one agency and something different from another agency. And also to make it easy for them to find all the information they need in one place. So that system of information developed very early on. I was in touch with my counterparts at other agencies very, very early on September 12th, and we were all realizing that this was going to be a very large event and starting to pull our teams of support together. So that was definitely what was happening for us starting in the wee hours of the morning that day. We actually pulled in a team of town staff and then eventually volunteers from the community to operate what we call the Joint Information Center. And this is the physical location where you put all of those agencies together to come up with the information people need and to distribute that. And so we had luckily I have a staff of about 20 town employees who have worked in the Joint Information Center before in other events like wildfires. And so they had experience, and we do training every year, and they all came together to help make that operation happen. And we were together solid for the next 2 weeks in that center while it was still open. So that's kind of the start of what my role is when I need to jump into action in a big event.
Sure. What are the different ways that you share that information with the public? How do you get it out there?
We have more and more tools for communication all the time, which is great. It adds more responsibility to a public information officer's plate, but that's good because you have more opportunity to reach different audiences. So we use a very large email distribution list. That's probably one of the earlier channels that we developed in my role since I became public information officer in 2009. So a couple thousand people on that list. And we use social media. That's been a wonderful addition to our tools, and Facebook and Twitter specifically. A lot of people follow those. It's a great way for them to get quick information served to them directly, makes it easy for them to follow what's going on and easy for us to provide little bits of new information as it comes in rather than waiting to include it all in an update, once or twice a day. We definitely rely heavily on the media, the local media. We have a couple of newspapers, as you know, and some non-traditional media bloggers here that were involved in reporting on the incident. And then, of course, the Denver media. As the event grew, we worked with national media and international media. I was interviewed by the BBC one evening. I'll remember that. That was very interesting. And the media is definitely a great tool for us to get our information out there. They really can help you get vital information to people who are watching the television or reading the newspaper or listening to the radio when we don't have those tools ourselves. We also had community meetings that we started on day 2 on the 13th of September, and we held a community meeting each morning for the next couple of weeks. We also held a specific meeting for evacuees at our evacuation center location or locations. We grew over time with that operation. So that was a big deal because communications failed us on day 2. We lost a lot of telephone service. We lost some cell service, most of us, internet. We weren't able to communicate very well with the media at a distance. I remember trying to exchange emails with the Denver Post and with the broadcast media in Denver a lot to do interviews because they couldn't get me on the phone. We simply couldn't get through to each other. So those community meetings became very important for the public, and they also were recorded and they were streamed over the town's website and on the local cable channel 12, but they were also recorded and placed onto our website, which meant that people could go and watch them later, including the media. They could pick up what was going on by watching those videos later and even use tidbits of them to help us relay information to their viewers. So there were a lot of tools. After communications failed us, we learned a lot, and we decided we needed some more basic low-tech tools, and we recently installed an AM radio station. That's been a really wonderful tool so far. We just got that up and running at the end of 2014, but just keep adding tools in there so that we can reach people when we need to.
What were some of the more challenging things? I imagine obviously losing part of your communication network, but what were some of the other more challenging things that you dealt with during the event?
Losing communication was the number one challenge. It was like every FEMA exercise I've ever been through in training. You keep throwing you one challenge after another, and you kind of have to set your personal emotions aside and deal with each thing as they come, and just remember that flexibility is key, and it's not worth getting upset over losing any tools that you have, because you really just need to keep moving forward. So communication loss was a major deal, so we just kept thinking of ways to improvise as a team. And the town staff did a great job of pulling together for meetings and getting information out there literally on paper in the community and utilizing volunteers. So that was one of the major challenges, but we met that challenge, I think, very well. Transportation was a massive challenge, losing roads. We were, not only losing roads made it difficult to connect with our partner agencies that are stationed down in the valley, but losing communications also affected that connection as well. So we were an island, and we did have to fend for ourselves, and jurisdiction kind of went out the window for emergency services. So the town handled a lot of incidents and issues outside of where we would normally handle them because we needed to, and our partners asked us to do that as well. So that was everything from law enforcement to evacuations to building inspections to make sure people's structures were safe before they went back in. So once we were able to get communications back up and running, and our partner agencies were able to travel the long distance around, either over Trail Ridge Road from the west, or once Highway 7 opened up a couple days after the beginning, they could come up that way. Things returned to a little bit more of how we would normally operate jurisdictionally. But transportation was a major issue for everybody. We had difficulty getting supplies into the grocery stores. There was concern over running out of fuel at the gas stations. People were not able to get basics like prescription medications and mail, and so we had to work with our partners in Grand Lake to set up kind of a shuttle service to get people back and forth so they could get those basics. And it was really just one improvisation after another as we went through the event. Town staff did a wonderful job. We have an amazing team, and that was really the thing that kept me going. I think that I had great support in the Joint Information Center, and great support in improvising with every challenge that came our way. And it was sometimes something that you would forget, that someone next to you working was actually evacuated from their home, or couldn't go home, or was concerned about a family member somewhere. So that was a major challenge. Town staff, we all had to kind of put our personal emotions aside, other than compassion, and really try to focus on the job that needed to be done. So that was a big challenge, I think, for all of us working in the emergency response, was trying to set aside those things so that we could focus on the immediate needs of the community and the rescue operations and the evacuations, and then moving into recovery type operations. So those were some of our major challenges.
Do you have any idea how much time you put in during those 2 weeks?
I have no idea how much time I put in during those 2 weeks. I know that I slept, it was usually 3 to 4 hours a day. The first operational periods, from about 2 a.m. on September 12th, I worked about 24 hours because we set up that Joint Information Center, and we opened a call center for those who had telephone. And it was important for me to oversee all of that, getting off the ground and making sure we knew what we had to respond to, because that changed every minute too. So it was about a 24-hour work day for me that first couple of days, and we were dealing with the loss of 911 services, and people were using social media for 911 type calls, and so it made it very difficult to sleep, because you didn't feel like you could. You didn't want to miss somebody writing in via email or posting something on Facebook about an emergency they were dealing with, because we were literally reporting to our dispatch and our emergency services gas leaks or lost people, or other infrastructure failures that were definitely life safety issues. So So in the very beginning, it was very difficult to find sleep, and as many staff as we had to support, we were all working. So there wasn't a good rotation system in yet in the beginning, where you had a shift come on and then a shift come on later where the first shift could go and rest. So we eventually got to that, but it was a few days into it before we could really, we felt that we had enough control over what we needed to do, that we could start using our staff in that way, which was better for everybody at that point. So I didn't go back and look at my notes, but I would estimate the normal workday for me for the first few weeks was probably 18 to 20 hours a day. And my boss wasn't happy with that, so don't get me wrong. It wasn't that we were all asked to do that, but there was a lot of work to do. Yeah.
Were you primarily, when you were working, just in the Joint Information Center, or did you have the opportunity to go and do other things as well? I guess what other experiences did you have during that, other than just being in charge of the Joint Information Center and being at those the public briefings and such?
So the majority of the work was definitely pulling together information for our officials that we could provide during the meetings and providing them with talking points for interviews. But I did get out as often as possible to speak with the media when they were able to get here or when they were able to call into us. I did a lot of telephone interviews. I did have the opportunity to go out with some of our emergency services and see what was happening, because it was real easy to never stop and take a look around at what was going on, because you were just dealing with the things as they came in. And it was important to me to be able to go to drive around and see what everyone was dealing with so that we could better help the public, because I don't think you can truly help and sympathize with what they're going through until you see, where they live and how it's been affected, or why their business has been closed, or why they can't get back to their home or get into town, or whatever it might be. So I took as many opportunities as possible to get out and actually look at what was occurring. And that happened more once the rain stopped. But it was important to me to be able to leave what I was doing and even just step outside of Town Hall for a while so that we could get a look at the street. Elkhorn flooded up to the gutter of, the curb and gutter of Town Hall. So I think one of the most important opportunities I had, getting out was to leave with our town administrator and our mayor and other town officials to meet with the agencies that were coming up to assess what was going on in Estes and to understand what our needs were after the disaster declaration, and be able to explain to them that, they could see the damage and they could see what was going on, but also be able to explain to them from my perspective in working with the public so closely how it was affecting everybody and how they were concerned, what they were concerned about, and obviously the long-term fears that were already creeping into all of our residents' minds at the time. So those opportunities to tour with FEMA or the Department of Local Affairs from the state of Colorado or Office of Emergency Management or other elected officials that came up to check on us, those were really important and very memorable experiences, because you could see the shock in their eyes when they saw what we'd been dealing with. And actually Estes was very lucky overall. We didn't lose lives. We lost we lost some properties and there was some property damage, but compared to some of our downstream neighbors, we fared pretty well. Nonetheless, it was shocking to see the damage and what people were going through and how many people were displaced and how many red tags there were on homes and businesses telling people they could not re-enter until safety was confirmed. So those visits with the out-of-towners, the people that came in to support us, were very important for me as well.
I would imagine that 18 to 20-hour work days, on top of the fact of the cause of those work days, was very stressful. How did you find that stress to affect you?
I work very hard to be flexible and adaptable, and I find that it doesn't really do me much good to get frustrated or even overwhelmed. So I try very hard not to let that get to me, so that I can keep functioning and helping everybody to the best of my ability. And I had a great team, so those helping with information made my job a whole lot easier and possible. So I appreciated that. After a few days of not getting a whole lot of sleep, and once adrenaline starts to wear off, it becomes a little more difficult to cope with anything that gets personal. So there's only one event that I remember in those couple of weeks that really got to me, and that was a personal thing. It was a day when we were seeing Fish Creek Road fail, and we were seeing people continuing to drive on it in spite of barricades, and we knew that it may have looked okay to people, but it was structurally unsound underneath, and we were worried about people. So that was the point at which the sheriff's office in the town and the National Guard came in to help us evacuate everybody to the east of Fish Creek Road. So that was a long stretch. It was just a few miles of roadway, and everybody on the east side of it, which is hundreds of people, really needed to get out of there, because we weren't sure if it was going to be weeks or months before we could get them back in there, and if there was any kind of an emergency on their side, a gas leak or loss of heat, or somebody runs out, they have no electricity and they run out of oxygen. Anything like that causes emergency responders to have to go in there, and it puts our emergency responders at risk. So we really wanted everyone to leave, and we really were trying hard to convince them to do that. Well, my parents happen to live over there. They live on the east side of Fish Creek, and they were among the people who were not ready to leave their homes. And normally it probably wouldn't have been so concerning to me, but my father has been ill. He's recently had a kidney transplant, which is fantastic, but at the time of the flood, he was in pretty late stage kidney failure and was not doing very well, and he really didn't have any business being isolated without good access to health care or the ability for us to get emergency services in there. So it was frustrating to me, understanding where they were coming from. It was frustrating to me that my parents were among the resistors that I was trying to convince to do the safest thing. And they were able to explain to me why, and they did have their supplies, but luckily it turned out that it wasn't that long that they were all isolated over there, and we were able to create some paths and some improvising once again to get people across that corridor back into their homes and able to get back in and out of town by putting up some temporary bridges. So that was lucky, but that was a day for me that was emotional. I got pretty frustrated that day. I think that was being tired, and then having a personal concern about my family. But stress definitely caused sleeplessness, and it was difficult to go home after a day of hardly sitting down, working for so many hours and and doing our best for people, and then saying, okay, I need to go home and get some rest. It's hard to go home and shut your mind off. You know how that is when you've had a really busy day. It's difficult to do that. So the challenge for me personally was just getting enough rest to where I felt truly refreshed and able to go back to work and not worrying about, getting frustrated with little things that might have come up, like that family situation. Luckily, I didn't have any more of those, though.
Sure. Did you have the chance to communicate with a lot of folks that didn't want to evacuate their homes, and what were some of the reasons that they didn't want to leave?
I communicated with dozens and dozens of people during that period of time who did not want to leave their homes. And evacuation in Colorado is voluntary. We cannot make you leave your home or your business, but once you leave, we can keep you from going back in. So a lot of people understand that, and they, for whatever reason, didn't feel comfortable leaving, whether it was for fear of looting, which we never once had any confirmed reports of actual looting in Estes. There were a lot of rumors, but no confirmed reports of that. But people were fearful of that, which is understandable. You know, you leave your home, you're in the middle of a disaster, people come in from out of town and try to take advantage. So there was a lot of that kind of concern. There was concern over leaving a home and there being some kind of problem there that they couldn't address. A lot of people, it didn't matter where you lived in the Estes Valley. As you know, there was groundwater and there were flooded basements everywhere. You didn't have to live next to a stream or river to experience flood damage. So people felt often that if they left, they would be losing control of that situation, and that they would come home to a lot of damage, and they didn't want that. So it was understandable, a lot of the reasoning that I heard from people. And people often feel invincible. They don't feel like anything's going to happen to them. I'm not going to need an ambulance at any point, so I'll be okay. You know, I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to stay put for now. This is probably the best and safest place for me. So that was the kind of logic that we heard for the most part.
Was there a moment during those couple of weeks that really helped lift your spirits, as it were? Something very positive that you witnessed or heard about, or something like that?
There were dozens of those moments that were uplifting. Every day, I mean, even in the worst hours when we were losing communications and losing roads, people were helping each other. And and you were there for some of the time, sitting in the Joint Information Center and realizing the person next to you hadn't been home in 3 days, but they were still there helping people and not worrying about themselves at all. You know, those kind of selfless acts of people, I found those to be very uplifting. We received a lot of thank you notes from the kids at the school. We saw a big poster that they did with, I remember, handprints and their names written all over it, thanking us for the work that we did. And I think that kind of stuff is always really helpful. In the Joint Information Center, in the very beginning, we were taking all of the offers for help. So if anyone wanted to come and volunteer, which people wanted to do that within hours of the rain, you know, of September 12th in the morning, they were already trying to come in and volunteer. And of course, we had to get more organized before we could accept that kind of stuff. But the offers were flooding in, so forgive the pun, but it was really great to see that. And people were here on vacation, or there were newlyweds here on their honeymoon, and they decided they wanted to help. And so those things were encouraging. The offers for food and financial support for flood victims. I mean, every other phone call that we were getting in the call center in the beginning was an offer of support versus a call for help. So that was all very uplifting, and there was a lot of fear, and we all had a lot of concerns, but that was all counterbalanced by people helping each other, and I think that was the best thing for me.
How were you personally affected by the flood? Was your house damaged at all, or did you have any water come in, or?
Yes, but no lasting damage, no lasting issues. My husband and I were in the middle of selling and buying a home. So I don't know why we ever chose September 13th, Friday the 13th, as a day to close on the sale of our old home, but we did. And we ended up having to move that closing, obviously, for obvious reasons, for about a week. But we were really concerned, obviously. We were concerned about our old home and our new home, and we were wondering if everything was going to fall through. And it was hard to worry about that, and for a couple of days I just didn't worry about it. I couldn't worry about it. But the very first evening I ran home because we have 2 dogs and I needed to make sure that they were taken care of and that I could get them to family. My husband and I had been kind of tag teaming to take care of them, but we realized we needed help with that. So we actually had some help from neighbors in watching them. But when I went home to check on them that evening, our back porch was completely filled up, and it was all the way up to the edge of the door frame. And as quickly as I could, I remember getting a bucket and trying to scoop water out of there. I knew it was in vain, but I felt like I had to do something for the few minutes I had. And so I felt when I left that we were probably going to come home to a flooded basement, but lo and behold, we didn't, and it was all okay. The sale of that house went through the next week, and a couple weeks after that, we were able to close on our new home, and we're there, and we got lucky. I mean, if you think about it, pretty much half of the structures in the Estes Valley were affected by the flood, whether it was a loss of utilities or a loss of access, damage from water or mud, whatever that might have been. So for us to be able to get by without any real damage was kind of amazing. So we felt lucky and grateful for that. We did, however, have a family cabin down Highway 34. My husband's parents, and actually my husband and I lived there for a while before we moved up to Estes full time. But that home was in Cedar Cove, which is largely gone at this point. Most of those cabins are gone at this point. And that cabin was severely damaged, and it's still standing, and we've done some work to it, the family has, and it will come back. Probably would have been better to start over with that, but because of its location, that wasn't an option. So we're doing our best down there with what is left of that cabin, and it's an important place to my in-laws. So it's good to see that it's still standing, but it was definitely stressful, and luckily nobody was there at the time of the flood in the family and was, hurt or injured. So we did deal with that, but to be honest, I didn't even think about that for several days after it all started. So there was that. And, I think that personally, it was really nice to hear from friends and family all over the place, calling in, wanting to know that we were okay, and trying to connect. And so that was nice, because it was difficult to find any time to stop and call anybody or let them know. And as much as we were preaching that to all of the people here locally, I wasn't doing the best job of keeping in touch with my friends and relatives at a distance. So it was nice that they were able to get through and check on us. So personally, that was really helpful.
How would you characterize the community reaction to the flood?
I think shock would be a good word to describe initially, but that was short-lived, or it wasn't as apparent for very long, because people did step up immediately to help each other. So it felt like the community picked itself up by its bootstraps really quickly and started cleanup efforts even on the first day, and I found that to be pretty amazing. We knew that we were an island in many ways. We didn't have a lot of outside support at first, and so we really didn't have any choice but to do that. And I think that resiliency of the community and camaraderie and setting differences aside, we always have issues as a community, that hot issues or controversial issues, but everything was set aside by everybody, and they just came together and did their best to help one another. So I think that's my biggest memory. That's what I remember of the community's reaction.
Can you describe sort of the atmosphere around town as the rain stopped and the water started receding, getting away from longer days back to a more normal work schedule?
We continued in our daily routine for a couple of weeks, where we would start the day very early and pull information together, and I'd prepare everything for the meetings and the public updates. So that routine continued for quite a while, and those updates continued, and the Joint Information Center continued even after we stopped doing community meetings a couple weeks into it. There just wasn't quite as much to share that was new, and the attendance was starting to dwindle down. So it was shortly after that we were getting into more, I can't say normal routine for the days, because it's still not normal. Everything, we still talk about the flood, and we're dealing with flood recovery half of every workday, but just the routine of the day started to become a little bit more like normal after a few weeks or a month or so. And that was really refreshing and helpful. And we started to see some things coming back, like events. We had the farmers market again, and that really helped to uplift everyone's spirits to have a little bit of normalcy, and some of the other special events. And we started to see more visitors coming back into town. And so after a few weeks, that provided a lot of hope to the local businesses and the residents to see that, okay, people know we're here, and we're okay. We're not devastated or wiped off of the map, which were some of the rumors that we were fighting during all of this. As you know, that they weren't true. So I think after a few weeks, getting to some of that was helpful for the entire community. It was also, though, at that point that we started getting more questions of how long is it going to be before I can flush my toilet again. I mean, we had 2 months, myself included, at both of our houses, our old house and our new house, where we could not use the toilet, and we were all using porta-johns. And so those kind of questions and a little bit of frustration about the lack of normalcy started to come in from people. And so we went through a period of adjustment where the shock had worn off and the reality had set in, and we're trying to cope with a lot of inconveniences and a lot of questions. And then it took some more time after that for us, I think, to, as a community, really evaluate what we needed to do to recover and what it might take, how long it might take, and when we might see a real return of normalcy. And we're still doing that. We're still working to rebuild the Fish Creek corridor, and we will be for another year and a half. So we're still in that phase.
You mentioned rumors, one of which being that Estes Park was gone.
Yeah.
I did hear that one. What are some of the other ones that were kind of circling around that you guys had to work to try and correct?
Yeah, rumor control is a big part of public information because you don't want people to be fearful of things that they don't need to fear. You don't want the public at a distance to think they can't come here anymore, or that you don't want the local businesses to think that nobody's going to come back and support them, and our community is going to suffer in the long term. So rumor control is a very important part of my job. The looting, the concern of the community about looting and reports of looting, that was really important for us to take care of quickly, because that just raises a fear level and doesn't help anybody cope with the stress that they're under. So we tried to take care of those as quickly as possible, and wherever we can, replace them with stories of how everyone's helping each other. And there were a lot of those stories and coverage out there in the media, so that was really good to see. There was a short period of time where we really weren't able to ask people to come to Estes Park unless they were providing a core service or emergency service, or they were a resident, because of the road situation. And at one point, Trail Ridge was the only way to get into and out of town. And a couple days later, Highway 7 was open to restricted traffic. But there was a period of time after that where there were rumors out there that we were not welcoming anyone back into town. And so we had to work carefully to provide the right message that, there was a period of time when we really were just hoping to get back onto our feet, and we needed to allow specific services into town. And then shortly thereafter, we opened our doors back up to everybody. But some of that original information stuck around longer than we wanted, where people felt like Estes had closed its doors because, and maybe related to the other rumor that we were wiped off the map or completely devastated, and we all knew that was inaccurate. So that was a really tough one to squash. We worked a long time, many days, to get the right information out there so that people wouldn't be afraid to come back up here and help or support our businesses or go into the park. And so I think those were the primary rumors. There were a couple of rumors about deaths in Estes Park, as you can imagine, but there were not flood-related deaths at that time, so we were able to control those rumors as well. We were relatively lucky as far as that goes.
Okay, so here we are more than a year and a half later. Mm-hmm. What do you still have to do on a daily or a weekly basis related to recovering from the flood?
We have many projects underway for flood recovery, and that's primarily where my flood work is helping people understand what we're doing in the Fish Creek corridor to repair the utilities, what we're planning to do for repairing the road and the trail. A lot of people affected by that. A lot of questions come in about that all the time, and so we do our best to provide a lot of information about what's going on out there. People are disrupted, we've got work going on out there, so we have to manage detours and road closures and all of that. So it's a big project, and it's been going on for 20 months, and it'll be going on for maybe another 20. So we've got a long way to go with that. There is a lot of work that's going to be going on for years in looking at how that event affects our floodplain, our regulatory floodplain, and the mapping of that into the future, and that has effects on everybody. I mean, that affects the downtown tremendously, and it affects everyone who lives along any of the watersheds in the Estes Valley. So we do a lot of education about that and help people understand with what we know now how it could change things for them in the future. And we've accompanied all that with master planning for recovery of the rivers. Fish Creek and Fall River specifically, those were the watersheds that were affected the most by the flood. So we brought together coalitions of citizens, and they continue to work on recovery and projects that they can do along those watersheds to make them healthier in the long term and more sustainable in the event of another flood like we had, or even something lesser. And we're looking at things that we can do downtown to protect our core commercial area, the economic center of the community, and the place that keeps us going as a sales tax driven economy. What can we do for the downtown to keep those properties out of the floodplain when they do come through and remap the FEMA regulatory floodplain? So that includes looking at, can we make our box culverts or bridges bigger? Can we widen the channels to create more capacity, just to do everything we can to lessen the effects on the businesses and residences downtown and in the other watersheds in the community too. So that's a big part of what we're doing now and we'll be doing for a couple years to come, searching for funding to make some very expensive flood mitigation projects possible. A lot of town staff are involved in that, and my involvement is primarily keeping the community informed of what we're trying to do and why.
Is there anything else, any other specific stories or incidents that you'd like to share?
Let me see, give me just a moment. Yeah, I would like to talk a little bit about kind of long-term outcomes of the flood. I think that would really be it. So, one of the great things that's come out of a disaster, this flood in particular, is the fact that it opened everyone's eyes in the community to our vulnerabilities in Estes Park and the things that are very important to us, the things that if they are compromised could really be a detriment to the future of the community. So we saw a lot of groups come together after the flood and identify things that we can do to make ourselves stronger, to grow and strengthen, diversify the local economy so that if we do experience a disaster, whether it's a wildfire or a flood or a recession, that we're able to rely on other aspects of our economy to keep us moving along so that everyone here is less affected and we're able to keep our businesses going, keep our families employed and the kids in the school, and basically just maintain a healthy community. So we saw a lot of groups come together, and the town is a partner in all of this, but there are many new leaders emerging in the community, new organizations that are really taking the lead in economic development opportunities, and we're just seeing a lot of really interesting projects that are bringing change to Estes and exploring change. What could we do? And so we're seeing things like development of a health and wellness niche in the community to bring people from far and wide to Estes Park for better health and wellness. We saw the voters approve the town selling Lot 4 up by the Stanley Hotel so that a wellness center could be built to bring in the new tourism sector. And I think that was very interesting and exciting. We saw an investment in the community when the voters chose to enact a new sales tax to invest in our infrastructure for trails and roads and the community center that will support our family and our families and residents here. as well as some emergency response communications items, which we've already used to build that radio station. So we just have really seen, I think, a change in the perspective in the community to take every opportunity we can to strengthen ourselves. And it's been very exciting, and I've been in Estes for 15 years almost, and it's the first time I've really seen that happen, where people set aside differences and really focused on the common good and what could we do to make ourselves more sustainable. So that's been a very exciting long-term outcome of the flood, and I expect to see that kind of energy continue for a long time.
All right, thank you very much. I don't have anything else. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.